Well, hi there. Thank you very much for checking out my YouTube videos. I do greatly appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit about Turo today, and we're going to have a little view at the car I just literally picked up. So, some things we talked about in the previous kind of my live chats that we kind of do, they're listed down below. I'd recommend you check them out. The video quality is horrible. I'm basically using a very cheap little camera and a Blue Yeti mic, so at least the audio is nice. My intent with those are actually to turn them into a little podcast about Turo and go from there. So, just bought it. It's a private sale. It is a 2014 Chevy Cruze. So, the internet's ablaze on this particular car as far as issues and concerns. But I did work for 2 GM dealerships in the past, and I've actually serviced these vehicles. And to be honest with you, there are some areas of concern when it comes to this particular unit as far as engines and mechanicals are concerned. But if they've already been sorted out, they're usually pretty decent. And the other one is if they haven't been abused heavily, they're usually okay. Things like the turbo, there's a couple little items there that can cause some issues when it comes to fasteners and fittings and hoses. And if they've been addressed, typically this is not a bad little car. Again, kind of subject to who's owned it in the past, just so you're aware of that. So, the previous owner seemed really nice. I guess this was his son's car at one point. It got traded in on a newer vehicle. He went back and bought the car from the dealer, and then ran it as his runabout to go to and from work and things along that line, like a daily, right? Previously, it was a leased car through General Motors, so it was one of those little red flag moments for me because I always go 3-year lease. They usually don't maintain them. However, I did go into the GM dealership, and they told me that the car had been properly serviced and maintained up to about a year ago, in which case I thought, okay, that's interesting. And he had switched over to Officers Auto Care Inc., a local shop. So in other words, he, I guess, didn't want to continue paying the $135 an hour shop rate at GM. So he switched over to here, which if you're at General Motors, and I used to do this at the desk, I'd always go to my manager and I'd say, hey, this is an 8-year-old car, or this is a 5-year-old car. We're going to lose them as a client because they're going to go off someplace else that's at $95 or $85 an hour. And yes, it does require a little more service wrench time traditionally because you got rust and corrosion to deal with. But if we put this kind of, we've got like a little tree in the back where we put work orders. And then the technicians go in and they pick the work orders off the tree and they go do the work, right? Visualize like little tiny little gnomes out in the back working away, right? So I always would say, let's try and keep the client base. Let's lower our shop rate to 95 or to match what the local Meineke shop is, right? And usually we've already had a pretty decent relationship with them in the past. And we'll just say, look, this is your VIP promotional card that gets you a discount, so we're competitive. And then you put it in the tree, but you put it in the tree for the 3rd and 4th and maybe 5th year apprentices to work on, which is what they do at Meineke anyways. They never give it to the senior tech. They always give it off to the lowly guy that's got, 3 years in or 4 years in, and it gives them a chance to have fun with rusty bolts and learn how to use a torch, right? So it's just one of my little pet peeves when I worked at General Motors. They kind of just said, away with you now. And I thought that was kind of an annoyance, or please, let's look at a brand new car. Most people today, at least in the Canadian market, rotate their cars out about 5 years. So the dealers don't really focus on that market, which I think it's a pretty big market to be focused on. And I think that's why you got Meineke, Canadian Tire, and all these other franchises out there working away in these little independent garages, which sometimes can be just as good or better than a franchise dealer. They can also be a lot worse. But again, the world of the internet's great because you can check the reviews, and these guys have decent reviews. So it tells me that they're probably a legitimate, nice little independent shop, right? So he's gone ahead, he's done vacuum lines, solenoids, he's done gaskets, like stuff that you wouldn't do if you're going to get rid of the car. So he spent a fair bit of money just doing the little known issues that are problematic with this particular vehicle. So that's great. Spark plugs, he did those as well, right on time for maintenance, like it's the scheduled maintenance program. So the gentleman that owned the car seemed to be, fairly knowledgeable on automotive servicing, or at least understood the implications of having a vehicle properly maintained does reduce your service costs dramatically because you don't have any breakdowns or failure points. So he's done things like oil cooler lines, a bunch of little stuff, like just things that you look at, they itemize up to, when you're looking at it, they do itemize up to a fair amount of money, but I always figure if you've got a car, you're going to spend around $1,200 a year on maintenance. It's going to average out along that line. You might luck out and get 1 year where you're just doing oil changes. You might get another year where you got to do tires, which case you're at that $1,200 mark pretty quick. Oil changes have been done. Transmission cooler lines, so transmission service was completed as well. So all stuff that when you look at a car, you kind of go, that's pretty legitimate. Like, rules of three. If he's done service, maintenance, and he's kept everything up to date, I shouldn't have much of a problem. He did a catalytic converter as well. And then he's got a bunch of Napa parts here that are kind of things that I think he probably did on his own. So he's got a battery that he changed up, probably in his front yard. So, so it just tells me that the guy was probably just your average guy. Do a little bit of maintenance, takes it to the shop for the big things in the diagnose and the regular oil changes, stuff that's messy. So that's pretty decent. He had the ultra rare, and you don't normally find this with someone selling a car, the actual seller's package. So it shows literally it was his son's car. They got it through a GM dealership locally, and a nice reputable local GM dealership. And it was a lease return from a 3-year program. Again, it went to their used car lot, and then they ended up buying it back through them, again, because they knew the car history, and dad's been driving it, or mom's been driving it for a little bit, and I think dad's been driving it based on the condition of the interior. It's got that manly look to it, if you know what I mean. So, like, everything was there. I ran Vin Checkup because it's $15 to see if it had any liens or registrations against it. Vin Checkup, horrible service. So don't bother. Save your $15. I went into the Ministry of Transportation. I bought a fresh one of these for $20, and I had the lovely lady there do a quick inquiry, which they can do, which I did not know. So they can do a daily inquiry to see if there's been anything registered as a lien. She said there was nothing officially registered as a lien, which usually means nothing registered. So unless there's some bizarre, abstract, personal loan that's been attached to it that hasn't been inputted, which would be a moot point, so it wouldn't really follow, or a garage lien, which I doubt because the bills are paid. So you can get a daily check or a fairly recent check, which, again, I was surprised, for liens through the Ministry of Ontario. And that's pretty decent. It doesn't come on the report, though, but they give the report is basically, as I said earlier when we were doing the little live conversations, that these are usually done within the year, and then they're in the system, and they do an update, and then an update. You never know when the updates come. So they don't do it daily. It's just one of those things. So, again, really nice little feature to it. So I picked it up. I called my insurance company up, and I've got temporary insurance in place, so it's covered from that standpoint. It's a long weekend, so I can't get into the Ministry of Transportation today and do the transfer, which is unfortunate, so it's going to have to wait till a Tuesday, which is fine. It's no big deal from that standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and take the vehicle for a little car wash. I've already kind of poked around under the hood a little bit, just checked all the basic stuff. Oil's level, coolant is there, nothing's spewing out of it, nothing's on fire. It's running okay. It's still got that little bit of a rattle and a shake, but I do believe it needs a PCV valve. I think that's the issue there, so I'm going to pull the valve cover off. This one has hydraulic lifters to it apparently, and sometimes they can be problematic, so it could be a lifter issue. I don't think so, at least just from driving. It's got lots of power, no unusual little quirks. It drives fine, no loud noises. Check the flex pipe, which is a known fault on these, and it looks reasonable. It's not brand new, but it doesn't look horrible. Catalytic converter looks nice and tidy. Like it looks like it's been reasonably cared for. Oil pan's got a little bit of weeping to it, so I might go ahead and pull the oil pan off and reseal it when I do the next oil change. The oil change on it isn't due for another like 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers, so it's already been done. So again, that's something where I may wait. Got to pull the tires off, check the brakes. We're going to do that later on. Tires look decent too, so there's no issues from that standpoint. So the visual aspect of it is great. at least the checklist from Chris Fix. So if you're ever out there looking for a car, go to Chris Fix's channel, and I'll leave a link down below. And he has a PDF you can actually download that's free that gives you a vehicle inspection checklist. I like it. I bring along a little clipboard. It looks official. It leaves me less distractions because I can kind of go, okay, this is what it is. So everything so far is really good. It's got a set of snow tires, which is great, and they're probably about 50%. So they're not brand spanking new. They're probably 2 or 3 years old. But the rims are there, the tires are there, and that's just kind of a nice little feature in Southern Ontario to be able to throw on. Now, the wheels that are on it, the all seasons, are great. Probably be fine right up until November, but snow tires probably should go onto the car. As far as features and functions are concerned, air conditioning works. Everything seems nice and tidy and clean. So I'm surprised by that. Because normally when you get into a used car, there's usually that lightning moment where you go, oh, that's why they're getting rid of it. And I did ask after the sale, I said, hey, look, we've already completed the transaction. Cash is in your hand. Anything I need to worry about? And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, no, not really, just service work. So I'm pretty happy about that from that standpoint. So we're going to go down to the storage unit, which I'm going to throw the tires in there. And we're going to go ahead and give it a quick little car wash. And then we're going to bring it back. And probably in the next couple days, I'm not going to work on it today or do anything from that standpoint. I've got my my Outlander going out today, so it's all ready to go. So I've done the photos, the checklist, and everything along that line. She's done. Just waiting for the client to send off their copy of their little selfie with their driver's license in place. And it should be a nice, easy transaction from that standpoint. So that's the to-do today. I've got some other videos to post, so it'd be really nice, again, if you went down below, checked out some of the other content that I'm doing. I'm starting to improve on that as we move along. So again, you can kind of see the growth, and we'll see how that works. Maybe in 5 years, we'll look back and go, wow, that was horrible. That was so painful. Why'd you do that to yourself? So that might be fun. So that's why I put those down there. And we'll go from there. Now, again, like every other YouTube out there, I am looking for subscribers. So this is kind of like that PBS moment where I'm looking for sponsors. So if you could subscribe, that'd be wonderful. If you could leave a couple comments, I actually prefer that over subscriptions. So just so you're aware of it, I actually like the comments. If you know anything about Turo and you're in the Canadian market and you're going to go, okay, I've run a car and these are some of the nightmare moments I've had, or I've run a vehicle and it went really well, because you always hear about the nightmares. Like everyone always says, oh yeah, they drove into the ditch and it was a nightmare moment, right? It would be nice to hear some stories that go, yeah, it went smooth for a year and a half. I had no problems. And it was a nice, easy transaction, and maybe it paid the car off, or maybe it took care of a pile of bills for you. That's what I'd like to hear. Also, if you're a body shop locally, I'm trying to get some local connections. So if you're kind of in the Listowel or Atwood area and you're kind of going, oh, that's interesting. Again, I'm kind of anticipating that when I have these cars out with new drivers, which is exactly seems to be what happens. A good example is my Outlander is going out with somebody that's coming in from the UK region. I'm not going to tell you where, but we might talk about that later. But his driver's license isn't Canadian, so I'm fully anticipating he's going to come back with a door ding and knock or a bump in the bumper. Like that's just going to be just, I think, par for the course when it comes to stuff like that. And because I expect that, I'm probably going to find that that won't happen. But I'm just going to assume the worst from that standpoint. I'm not assuming the worst. He seems really nice. He sent me the photos. He's like a nice senior citizen. Probably drives like a Eastern European, so he's probably used to traffic and the opposite side of the road. I'm going to assume. I have no idea, but he just seemed pretty solid from that standpoint. So I'm not that worried. But something like this little cruise, I'm going to assume because of the price point, I'm going to get that new Canadian, which is kind of what I'm shooting for. So I'm going to get probably a nice little Indian student, or someone who's doing factory work and working like 3 days or 4 days a week, because they've got a cap on what they can do. They don't have a car. Maybe this one, price point wise, works, especially if you buddy up. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Where I'm working, which is an automotive assembly plant, most of my shift work, because I'm not on a primary shift, is predominantly folks from India. So I think we're running probably 60 or maybe even 80%, foreign workers in our end of it on like a night shift. Day shift's different. a lot of Canadians on there, and same thing with the kind of the afternoon shift. But predominantly, it seems to be they take advantage of the night shift. Mainly, I think it's because of the language barrier. I'm starting to veer off on topic, so I do apologize. But I think it's a language barrier, and I think they just like to network and say, okay, well, if I'm working, and I would do the same thing. If I were moving to India, I would probably work the night shift with a bunch of Canadians, right? That would be, I would find that perfectly acceptable. Then you've got the ability to have that conversation at break time, go have lunch with a buddy that can speak your language. They're pretty good with English. Like, I'm going to tell you that. It's surprising because they'll mystify you from that standpoint. So that's not the struggling point. I think it's just a comfort level. And you're kind of moving into Canada. And you're kind of just slowly getting kind of acclimatized to it. Try to show up if you're coming in from India. Try to come here during the summer. You don't want to be here in January. Just fair warning, because otherwise you're going to assume it's going to be like that for the rest of the year. It's not. It's actually, once you get into, like, we've got 4 seasons, which I know India has that too, but our winters can be brutal, especially if you're used to a little warmer climate. Southern Ontario is humid too, so you're going to feel very comfortable, from what I understand. It's not an issue. If you're moving out to Alberta, or you're going further north, or you're going to any other parts of Canada, weather systems change dramatically. So if you're from India, just be aware of that. Again, this is me going off on a tangent because we're talking about a used car. So let's get back to focused on this one. So again, if you're in the automotive trade, I'm also looking for somebody that can maybe have a conversation about financing, talk about sublending, traditional lending, how banks work, how cars are approved. Does the actual physical car mean anything? Or is it just literally a credit rating that gets you into it? Do you look at the equity standpoint of it, or do you look at it from a standpoint of it's just a dollar value, we don't care? And I don't think that's the case, but we should probably talk about that. That'd be fascinating for a first-time buyer. The other one is I've been trying to get a hold of a decent insurance broker. I have a service. It's somewhat automated, so it's one of those things where I don't really talk to a broker unless I've actually got a problem, and they seem to kind of rotate. So I never really talked to the original person that I had back in the day now. So they've kind of cycled through a whole bunch of staff. So it's unusual from that standpoint. So I don't have that relationship to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got a couple questions. And I know they're outside my wheelhouse, like they don't really apply to me. But maybe there's a couple things out there that I would like to talk about. Like, for instance, does the color make a difference when you buy a car? Do I pay more in insurance for the red one? Or do I pay less for the dark silver one? Which would explain why in Canada there's a ton of dark silver cars. Now, the other one I'd like to talk about is when you're looking at categoried cars. And I've experienced this before, where if you're looking at like this lovely little Cruise, is cheaper to insure than a Ford Focus. It's actually quite a bit cheaper. But yet they're in the same category and classing as far as vehicles are concerned. Same thing with a Honda Civic, is a little bit cheaper to insure than I think a Toyota Corolla. But you wouldn't think that, right? You would think the Corolla would be cheaper. So it'd be really great if someone's out there in the insurance industry and you kind of go, hey, you know what, I'd like to answer a few questions. That would be great. We're just going to go from that standpoint, and nothing colossal. And if you've got a YouTube channel and you're saying, hey, you know what, it would be great to support myself or for me to support you, I'm always looking to kind of network and get kind of an idea where we can go with things, which is kind of cool. You might come up and say, Keith, you're doing everything all wrong. This is how your insurance should be set up. You're crazy for doing it this way. Yeah, and that would be great. So again, I'm always looking for that helpful direction. So we're going to head over to the storage unit, pop my new to me snow tires into the little area, and going to go give the car a bath, as I said earlier. And then we're going to bring her back, park her, and then later on we will do some exterior stuff, and maybe we'll look at a few other little things on the vehicle and go from there. Again, thank you very much. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day.